You're about to hear a story that begins in the cold silence of a forgotten town, where a little girl pulls a sack of firewood through the snow, with only her dog beside her. If you believe that even in the darkest places, light can find a way in, stay with us. Gently tap like, subscribe to our channel, and let the warmth of this story unfold. In the quiet, snow-choked town of Frost Hill, Montana, winter didn't knock, it barged in, settled its bones in every crevice, and dared anyone to move. The frost clung to windows like stubborn ghosts, and the roads cracked beneath the weight of silence. In this place forgotten by the sun, a little girl named Lila pulled a sack of firewood behind her each morning, her breath rising in fragile clouds as she trudged through the snow. She was 9, small for her age, with a narrow face and eyes too tired for someone who hadn't yet seen a decade. Her tangled hair, the color of chestnuts, spilled from beneath a knitted hat that was more whole than wool. Her gloves didn't match, one was an old man's driving glove, the other a child's mitten, but they did the job well enough to protect her from the biting air. Beside her walked Rex, a large German shepherd with thick, matted fur and a scar that ran just under his left eye. Rex was 6 years old but carried himself with the weight of 10 winters. His gait was steady, protective, and his amber eyes never left the path ahead, or the people who might be waiting to sneer. After her parents died in a fire that destroyed the old warehouse at the edge of town, Lila and her younger brother Noah had been left with nothing. Rumors had spread quickly, arson, they said. The father lit the match. And just like that, Lila became the arsonist's girl, a name spat rather than spoken. The children at school whispered. Adults turned their backs. People crossed the street. So she stopped going to school. She stopped talking. And she started pulling firewood door to door, trying to earn enough to keep Noah warm, fed, and out of the cold. They lived in an old wooden shack near the tree line, barely insulated, roof patched with metal sheets and tarps. No electricity. No phone. The only warmth they had came from the small stove in the corner and whatever firewood Lila could trade for rice, soup bones, or antibiotics. Rex never left her side. He had been her father's dog, trained, obedient, fiercely loyal, and when the fire took everything else, Rex stayed. They slept curled together on a cot, and when the wind howled like a banshee through the forest, it was Rex's heartbeat that kept Lila from drifting too far into fear. On one morning colder than the rest, Lila's hands were stiff and red as she tied the frayed rope around the mouth of the burlap sack. Inside were carefully cut logs, some still smelling faintly of pine. She gave Rex a quiet nod, and they set out toward town. The snow was up to her knees in places, and the wind slapped her face with invisible fingers. Every few steps, the sled caught a rut or patch of ice, jerking her small body back. Rex would growl low and help nudge the sack forward with his nose. She stopped first at Mrs. Halderman's, an old widow who never opened her door but always left 2 quarters and a note that said, "Don't look me in the eye." Lila didn't mind. 2 quarters was still soup. Her next stop was at the back alley of the school, where the janitor sometimes bought logs to heat the little side office. But today, no one came out. Just the echo of a bell and laughter she no longer belonged to. The cold was crawling into her chest now, deeper than before. By noon, her arms trembled. Rex whined and circled her legs. She reached down to stroke his head but missed, her fingers numb. She pressed on, toward the main square. Somewhere around the town's war memorial, she stopped. Her breath was shallow. The white in her vision thickened. Her knees buckled. Rex barked once, loud, urgent. But no one came. The sack of firewood tipped over beside her, spilling across the pavement like broken pieces of her body. Rex stood over her protectively, teeth bared at anyone who dared approach. But they didn't. They watched from a distance, merchants, shoppers, children with candy bars in mittened hands. And then, she was still. The morning after the storm, Frost Hill remained locked in silence, draped in fresh snow that reflected the pale light of a weary sun. The roads were slick with frozen slush, and the sky was that shade of white-gray that made it hard to tell where earth ended and heaven began. Lila Hollow, her breath rising in shaky plumes, trudged down Main Street with a half-empty burlap sack of firewood trailing behind her. Her small frame bent under the weight, though the burden was more hunger and cold than the logs themselves. Her coat, still patched and too thin, was soaked through at the hem. One mitten had gone missing sometime before dawn. Her fingers, raw and red, curled around the coarse rope handle as she tried to focus on the rhythm of her steps. She hadn't eaten since the sliver of bread the night before. Milo had needed it more. Rex, her faithful German shepherd, walked silently beside her, his sharp eyes scanning the passers-by like a sentry on duty. At 10 years old, Rex had grizzled fur that told stories of battles past. His gait had a slight limp, but his presence was commanding. Every time someone gave Lila a sideways glance or muttered under their breath, Rex growled, not threateningly, but with a low warning that said, "She's not alone." They passed by the Frost Hill Bakery, where warm smells of cinnamon and yeast teased Lila's senses. Her stomach turned, but she kept walking. She had 3 more bundles to sell before she could afford cough syrup for Milo. At the corner near Parker's supply store, the snow had melted into a patch of treacherous slush. Lila's boots slipped slightly as she turned, her vision flickering at the edges. Her breath came shorter, and a wave of dizziness washed over her. She paused, leaning against a street lamp. Her lips were cracked, her cheeks a ghostly pale under the windburn. Rex nudged her gently, but she shook her head and whispered, "I'm fine." She wasn't. The sack snagged on a broken piece of concrete. She bent to untangle it, and as she stood back up, the world spun. Her legs gave out. The sack spilled open, firewood tumbling across the snow-stained road. Lila crumpled onto the street, a soft thud swallowed by the cold. Gasps echoed nearby, but no one rushed forward. A couple stepped around her. A shopkeeper peered out from behind a frosted window. One man took out his phone, but only to film. Rex barked, a fierce, guttural sound that shattered the winter quiet. He stood over Lila's motionless body, hackles raised, barking again and again. When a boy on a bicycle came too close, Rex snapped at the air, herding people back. His eyes were wild with fear. Then, from the south end of Main Street, the hum of an engine. A dark green pickup truck slowed, tires hissing against icy asphalt. The driver's door opened. Out stepped a tall man in a thick navy coat, a knitted cap pulled low over silver-streaked hair. He moved with quiet urgency, his boots crunching snow with the sure steps of someone trained to act under pressure. Adam Cole had seen worse than this, fields soaked in dust and blood, the chaos of war, the silence after, but something about the scene before him struck him hard. The child, unconscious, small as a breath. The dog, loyal to the end, baring teeth to protect her. He raised both hands and spoke in a calm, steady voice. "Easy, boy. I'm here to help." Rex didn't move, but his barking stopped. He sniffed the air, then took one step back as Adam approached. Adam knelt beside Lila, removing a glove to check her pulse. "Weak," he muttered. Her forehead burned under the icy touch of his hand. He gently brushed her hair back and spotted it, just below her left ear, a faint scar in the shape of a crescent. Old, healed, but unnatural. Not from falling. Not from childhood clumsiness. Adam's jaw tightened. He recognized the kind of scar inflicted in anger, not accident. He lifted Lila carefully, wrapping her in his jacket. Her body barely weighed anything. He turned to Rex. "You coming?" Rex answered by trotting ahead, leading the way. Adam's clinic sat 2 streets over, nestled between the old library and a boarded-up barber shop. Inside, warmth and the soft scent of antiseptic filled the space. He laid Lila gently on a cot in the back room. Rex circled 3 times before lying down beside her, his head resting against her arm. An hour passed. Then 2. Lila stirred. Her eyelids fluttered open, and her first word was a hoarse whisper, "Rex?" "He's right here," Adam said from the corner. He had been watching, quietly. He stood, walked over, and handed her a cup of warm broth. "Where?" "My clinic," he replied. "You passed out on Main. Almost got frostbite." She nodded, eyes avoiding his. "Sorry." "Nothing to be sorry about." He waited a moment, then added, "What's your name?" "Lila." "Hollow." Adam blinked. The name pulled at a thread of memory. He looked at her face more carefully now, the sharp lines, the heavy quiet in her gaze. "You're Tom Hollow's girl?" She flinched at the name. Then nodded. "They said he burned our house down." Adam didn't respond immediately. He remembered Tom Hollow, dedicated, level-headed, a man who once carried a wounded elk 3 miles out of a ravine just to save it. The idea that he had snapped and burned his family alive never sat right. Adam said nothing, but inside, something shifted. Lila reached down to the side of the cot where her sack lay folded. Her hand brushed something rigid. Curious, Adam helped her lift the corner. Tucked beneath a loose board inside the sack was a small metal tin, rusted at the edges, carefully taped shut. "May I?" he asked. She hesitated, then nodded. Inside the tin were 2 things, a charred piece of metal, a fragment of a firefighter's badge, and a folded, yellowed piece of paper. Adam unfolded it slowly, the script faded but legible. "Lila, if anything happens to me, know this, I didn't run. I stayed to save a life. They might tell you different. But the truth matters." It was signed in a shaky hand, Thomas Hollow. Adam swallowed. The weight of the note, the scar, the loyal dog, this wasn't the story the town believed. He looked at Lila, who now stared back at him with quiet terror. Not the fear of strangers. The fear of being believed, and what it might cost. Adam folded the letter again and said softly, "I think it's time we talked about what really happened that night." Rex stirred and let out a low, almost relieved sigh. Snow continued to fall outside, but inside that small room, something warmer had begun to thaw. The snow had stopped, but the cold in Frost Hill had only grown sharper, seeping through window panes and into bone. Inside the modest backroom of Adam Cole's veterinary clinic, a fragile silence had settled. Lila lay curled beneath 2 wool blankets, her breathing steadier now, though shadows of fatigue still clung beneath her eyes. Rex rested at her side, ever watchful, his ear twitching at the creak of old floorboards. The metal tin Adam had found the day before sat on the table beside a cup of half-finished broth, its rusted lid now open, the folded letter carefully smoothed flat beside it. Adam stood near the window, hands in his coat pockets, staring out into the swirling frost. He hadn't slept much. His mind kept circling back to the letter. The words written in Thomas Hollow's hand weren't just sentimental. They were a whisper from the grave, a testimony smothered by official reports and town gossip. "I didn't run. I stayed to save a life." That wasn't the act of a coward, or an arsonist. Adam had seen men lie to protect their legacies, but this didn't read like vanity. It read like guilt, wrapped in love. But guilt for what? By mid-morning, Lila stirred and pushed the blanket aside. "I need to go," she said softly. "My brother, already taken care of," Adam replied. "I stopped by the shack early. He was still asleep, warm enough. I left food." Lila blinked, unsure how to respond to kindness so freely offered. "Thank you," she said after a pause, her voice hoarse. Adam nodded. "You're not leaving until you've eaten again. And there's one more thing I need to show you." He turned to the table and retrieved something wrapped in an old hand towel. "I found this under the loose board in your firewood sack. I think it was meant to be hidden." He unwrapped it gently to reveal a charred metal badge, blackened and bent, but the engraved numbers were still visible, Engine 14, Frost Hill Volunteer Fire Department. Lila's breath caught. That's my father's. There's more, Adam said, and held up a small wooden object no bigger than his palm, an odd, hand-carved figurine of a bear, hollowed out underneath. I found this inside your sack too. Look underneath. Lila took it cautiously, flipping the bear over to find a name etched inside with a burned nail, H.G. For a moment, she just stared. H.G., that's Henry Green. He was the deputy fire chief. He died in the fire too. Adam crouched to her eye level. Or so they said. But here's the strange thing. I knew Green. We served in different units overseas. He wasn't the kind of man to carve bears or leave notes. But he was the kind of man who'd hide evidence if someone ordered him to. Lila's eyes widened. Are you saying? I'm saying we don't know the whole story. That afternoon, after making sure Lila had eaten and Rex was bandaged up from a wound on his shoulder, Adam locked up the clinic and made a quiet detour. He took an old, snow-dusted road north, away from the bustle of the town center, until the tires of his truck crunched into the frozen soil of an abandoned field. At the far end, surrounded by a rusting fence, stood what remained of Hollow Haven's storage depot, the same warehouse that had burned down 7 years ago, killing Lila's parents and, supposedly, Henry Green. The building had been deemed structurally unsafe and left to rot. But Adam wasn't here for the structure. He was here for what might have survived the flames. Rex jumped out first, sniffing the ground as if the scent of the past still lingered. Lila followed, bundled in layers of coats that Adam had given her. Her breath came fast, not from the cold, but from memory. The scent of scorched wood, even so many years later, still lingered like a ghost. There, she said quietly, pointing to the western wing. That's where they found them. Or said they did. Adam nodded and led the way. Inside, the air was musty, thick with dust and mildew. Floorboards creaked and brittle glass cracked beneath their boots. Lila hesitated at the threshold, and Adam offered his hand without a word. She took it. They passed through blackened beams and melted steel shelves, until something caught Rex's attention. He barked once, then padded toward a collapsed section of wall where a steel cabinet lay half buried under debris. Adam crouched beside it and cleared away charred planks. With a grunt, he pried open the warped door, and inside, miraculously protected, was a small black box. It was a digital camera, the kind used for warehouse security. Its outer casing was scorched but intact. Adam's heart thudded. It shouldn't have survived, he murmured, turning it over to inspect. But if the memory card's still inside? It was. Later, back at the clinic, Adam transferred the footage to his laptop. Lila sat close, gripping Rex's fur. The first few files were corrupted. Static. Blackness. Then, movement. A timestamp flickered, November 2, 2018, 8:31 p.m. The screen showed the warehouse hallway, lit by overhead fluorescents. 3 figures entered the frame. One was unmistakably Thomas Hollow, wearing his fireman's coat. Another was Henry Green. The third was obscured by a thick scarf and hood. The footage jumped. The next clip was frantic. Hollow was yelling, pointing toward the north exit. He grabbed a small child, no older than 4, and carried her out of frame. Behind him, the hooded figure moved toward a gas line valve with deliberate steps. Then, static. Another clip. Flames roared. The camera shook before cutting to black. Adam leaned back, stunned. He didn't start it, Lila whispered. He saved someone. And whoever was in that hood knew exactly what they were doing, Adam said grimly. They knew where the line was. Knew how to start it and disappear. The truth was uglier than rumor, but it was real. It meant someone in Frost Hill had framed Tom Hollow. Someone powerful enough to bury this for years. Adam glanced toward the window. Snow had begun falling again, softly now. But inside the clinic, the air was no longer heavy with doubt. There was movement. Purpose. Rex let out a quiet huff and placed a paw on Lila's lap. She smiled weakly. He knew. All this time. He never left my side. Adam gave a small nod. Dogs have a way of holding truth when people forget. Outside, Frosthill looked the same. Cold. Still. But a fire had been lit, not the kind that burned buildings, but the kind that burned lies. And Adam Cole had no intention of letting it die out. The morning sun barely broke through the thick cloud cover hanging over Frosthill, casting a pale yellow hue that did little to warm the frost-laced town. Adam stood outside the clinic, the fire tag and photograph weighing in his coat pocket, heavier than they should. Lila was resting inside, still weak, but her breathing had improved. Rex remained curled at her side like a stone guardian, only stirring when Adam approached the door. Adam had barely slept. The image of Michael Holloway running through the flames with a child in his arms haunted him, burned its shape into his thoughts. That photograph didn't match the narrative Frosthill had been repeating for 4 years. It hinted at something deeper, something hidden. He needed answers, answers only one person might hold. Joanna Lake had once been the town clerk, the kind of woman who remembered everything, every signed paper, every whispered request, every meeting that didn't make it to the official records. But 3 years ago, after the fire and a sudden departure from her position, she had left town without a word. Rumor said she lived alone now on an old sheep farm beyond the northern hills, a place few ever visited, not because it was dangerous, but because Joanna didn't want to be found. Adam turned the ignition on his truck, the engine grumbling in protest before surrendering to motion. The drive north took nearly 40 minutes through winding forest roads and snow-covered ridgelines. Pines stood like solemn sentinels on either side, their needles heavy with frost. The wind howled through the branches, sharp and mournful. The road narrowed near the edge of Cedar Hollow, opening into a flat clearing where a weathered farmhouse stood. It leaned slightly to the left, its shingles patched with tin, the porch wrapped in tarps to keep the draft out. A single chimney puffed thin smoke into the sky. A scarecrow stood near the gate, dressed in a faded sheriff's uniform, an odd, almost eerie sight. Adam raised an eyebrow but didn't comment. He parked, stepped out, and walked toward the porch. The snow crunched beneath his boots. Before he could knock, the door opened. Joanna stood in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes sharp as broken glass. She was in her late 50s, tall and lean, with streaks of white in her tightly braided dark hair. Her face was lined, not from age, but from disappointment, like someone who had been right about too many things too late. She wore a flannel coat with holes at the cuffs and mismatched gloves. "Adam Cole," she said flatly. "Took you long enough. You knew I'd come. I saw the newspaper last week. And I knew the moment someone dug too close to the fire, you'd end up on my porch." He nodded. "Can I come in?" Joanna stepped aside without a word. Inside, the farmhouse was cluttered but not dirty. Books lined the walls, stacked on every flat surface. A wood-burning stove crackled in the corner. A black cat with one ear missing watched from atop a cupboard, blinking slowly. Adam sat at the small kitchen table while Joanna poured coffee into mismatched mugs. "I need to ask you about the night of the warehouse fire," he began. Joanna didn't sit. She leaned against the counter, holding her mug like a shield. "I thought you might. I found something," he continued. "A photograph of Michael Holloway. He was carrying a child out of the flames. It contradicts the official story." Joanna's jaw tightened. "There was no official story, Adam. Just what they decided to print." "Who's they?" She stared at him. Then she sighed. "The town council. That week was a mess. There was a meeting, unannounced, not on any agenda. It happened after hours, no witnesses, no recordings. Only the 5 council members were there, plus Luther Grant. The mayor at the time. She nodded. And Michael Holloway. They called him in about a security matter involving the storage of budget records. What I know is that 3 hours later, the warehouse burned. Michael died, and the entire council denied he was ever in the building. Adam leaned forward. So they erased him from the scene. Worse, Joanna said. They framed him. They blamed the fire on faulty wiring and said he entered unauthorized. That he'd gone unstable after a failed rescue call. It was all convenient. Too clean. The warehouse stored all physical budget ledgers, records of spending, misallocated funds, emergency aid never delivered. And you had proof of this? Joanna looked toward the wood stove. I kept a backup flash drive. Every meeting transcript, every alteration, every redacted file. It's in a safe buried behind the sheep pen. Adam blinked. You buried town records in your backyard? Frosthill buries truth better than coffins, she muttered. I just learned from the best. Adam didn't smile. I need it, Joanna. This girl, Lila, Michael's daughter, she deserves to know the truth. Joanna's eyes softened just enough. I'll get it. While she disappeared outside, Adam stepped onto the back porch. Snow had begun falling again, soft and steady. He watched the hills stretch in every direction, and in that silence, something stirred behind him. Rex. The dog had followed him, silent as breath. He stood at the edge of the porch, ears high, body alert. Then he growled low, not at Adam, but toward the distant tree line. Adam turned, squinting. Down the slope, beneath a collapsed watchtower that once marked the old rail trail, he saw it, a shape of warped metal half buried in snow. A structure scorched black along one side. He recognized the twisted supports and broken trusses. The old municipal warehouse. Show me, he said softly to Rex. They made their way down the slope, snow crunching underfoot, wind biting harder now. The air grew colder, stiller, like a breath held in suspense. Inside the skeleton of the warehouse, it smelled of old ash and rust. Rex nosed through debris, sniffing with purpose. In the far corner, half buried under fallen siding, was a small, fireproof lockbox. The latch was melted, but the casing had held. Adam pried it open with a crowbar. Inside, a camera, old, partially melted, but with the SD card still intact. He didn't say anything. Just looked at Rex, then back at the wreckage. Sometimes, he murmured, memory fights harder than flame. The sky over Frosthill was a solid sheet of gray, thick and unmoving, as if the heavens themselves were holding their breath. Adam stood in the clinic's back room, the camera's memory card resting in his hand like it carried the weight of a verdict. He had spent the entire night transferring the files to his laptop, staring at the flickering footage over and over again. The resolution was grainy, colors muted, but the truth in it was unmistakable. The timestamp showed 11:42 p.m., 3 hours after the supposed end of the town council's emergency meeting the night of the fire. The footage revealed the interior of the municipal warehouse, shelves lined with boxes, a dim light from a maintenance bulb flickering in the corner. Then came the sound of hurried footsteps. Michael Holloway entered the frame, covered in soot, carrying a little girl no older than 5. His coat was open, singed. He limped. Behind him, fire crawled along the rafters. He paused once to shift the girl higher in his arms and looked up, into the lens of the security camera. The image was brief, but enough. It wasn't the face of a man fleeing responsibility. It was the face of a father doing what fathers do. Adam had seen the footage 10 times. He saw no sign of madness, no gasoline, no trigger. Just panic. Smoke. Duty. And courage. He closed the laptop and slid the copied files into a weatherproof envelope. Outside, wind slapped against the clinic's shutters. Rex wasn't on the porch as usual. Odd. Adam stepped outside. The snow was beginning to fall again, soft flakes swirling gently in gusts. He called out. "Rex." No response. He circled the building. The gate was open, left unlatched, perhaps, or forced. He crouched, noticed a set of paw prints in the snow. Then tire tracks. A second pair of boot prints that didn't belong to him. Rex was gone. The panic came fast and quiet. Adam jogged back inside, checked on Lila. She was asleep, curled in a heavy quilt on the cot by the stove, Jamie's small photo in her hand. Adam hesitated, then closed the door behind him, heart pounding. Someone had taken the dog. Later that morning, Adam made his way into town with the envelope pressed inside his coat and dread curled low in his gut. He stopped by the post office first, where Meredith Clark, the same postmaster who had turned away from Lila, watched him approach with hesitant eyes. She was shorter than he remembered, her old green cardigan frayed at the wrists, her face tense. "I need this sent priority," Adam said, placing the envelope on the counter. "One to the state press office. One to Helena Daly." Meredith blinked, glanced down at the addresses. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. "Do it today," Adam added. "Please." She nodded, almost afraid to ask what was inside. Adam didn't wait. He left the post office, turned onto Oak Ridge Street, and headed toward Town Hall. The streets were unusually quiet. Shops were open, but curtains were drawn. People glanced up, then quickly away. He pushed through the heavy oak doors and walked straight into the mayor's office without knocking. Inside, Mayor Everett Denton was sipping coffee and reading the Frost Hill Ledger. He was a man in his late 60s with a frame still solid from his youth as a high school wrestling coach. His gray hair was cut military short, and his eyes were small and quick, constantly calculating. He looked up as Adam entered, not surprised. "You look like a man ready to light a fuse," Denton said, setting his mug down. "I've seen the footage," Adam replied. "Michael Holloway didn't start that fire. He was saving a child. Your counsel lied." The mayor sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Adam, I expected more discretion from you. Someone took my dog last night." Denton didn't flinch. "Then maybe next time, don't stick your nose where it doesn't belong." Adam stepped forward, fists clenched. "You can't scare me. And you won't bury this." Denton's voice dropped, quiet and hard. "You have no idea what this town would do to protect its legacy. People were promised things after that fire, compensation, positions, land grants. If you bring this to light, you're not just taking on me, you're taking on everything Frost Hill has built since." Adam shook his head. "Then maybe it needs to burn again." He turned, walked out, letting the heavy door slam behind him. The silence of the hallway rang louder than any shout. Back at the clinic, Lila was sitting up when Adam returned. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow, but sharper than before. "Where's Rex?" she asked immediately. Adam paused. Then told her the truth. Lila didn't cry. Her lips trembled, but she nodded, swallowing the panic. "They want you to stop." "I won't," Adam said. Her voice was small, but steady. "Then we keep going." That night, Adam couldn't sleep. The wind beat harder against the walls, and shadows moved like ghosts across the ceiling. At dawn, he returned to the truck, loaded up firewood, and drove back to the wreckage of the warehouse. He walked the perimeter, looking for signs, of struggle, of traps, of anything left behind. Nothing. But Rex's collar, chewed, broken, was hanging from a twisted beam. He took it, clenched it in his hand. When he returned to the clinic, Lila was standing in the doorway. She held the photograph Adam had printed from the video. The one of her father. "He went back for someone," she said. Adam nodded. "So we do, too." Snow had fallen all night, thick and wet, blanketing Frost Hill in a heavy silence that seemed to press down on the rooftops and hearts of those who lived beneath them. By morning, the trees stood like frozen statues, and the streets were empty save for the hush of wind and the soft creaking of porch boards settling under weight. The town looked beautiful, peaceful even, but Lila had learned long ago that beauty could be cruelly quiet. She stood by the window of the clinic, her small fingers clutching the frayed edge of the curtain. Adam sat nearby, silent, flipping through pages of council records that Joanna had sent over by courier. Most of them were redacted or vague, but the patterns were there: budget transfers signed with initials that didn't match, large sums diverted from emergency relief to private properties listed under shell companies. Still, none of it was enough. Not yet. Rex had been missing for 2 days. Lila hadn't spoken much during that time. She ate little. Her face remained still, but her eyes flickered constantly to the door, the corners of the room, the sound of any footsteps outside. Adam had tried to assure her, to say Rex would find his way home, but doubt had begun to gnaw at him, too. Whoever had taken the dog had done it deliberately. And they hadn't made contact since. It was the waiting that hurt, the space where fear lived. But that night, everything changed. It was close to midnight when the wind shifted. A sudden gust rattled the front windows of the clinic and knocked loose a tin snow shovel resting against the porch rail. Adam stirred from his desk, frowning. Lila, already awake, sat up straighter. Then came the sound. A single, hoarse bark. She ran to the door without hesitation, barefoot across cold tile, wrenching it open before Adam could stop her. Outside, half buried in snow, was Rex. He was limping badly, one eye nearly swollen shut, his flank streaked with dried blood and soot. His fur was matted, patches of it missing, and a long gash ran across his shoulder. But his tail gave one small wag at the sight of her. In his mouth, clamped carefully between his teeth, was a small, weathered canvas pouch. Lila dropped to her knees in the snow, flinging her arms around his neck, not caring about the blood or the cold or anything except the weight of him, warm, alive, returned. Rex collapsed into her embrace, exhaling a low, relieved breath, like a soldier home from war. Adam reached them seconds later, crouched beside the dog. His hands moved automatically, checking pulse, breathing, the extent of the wounds. He needs stitches. And fluids. He came back, Lila whispered, voice cracking. He found his way back. Back inside the clinic, under warm lights and the quiet hum of the space heater, Adam cleaned Rex's wounds. The dog didn't resist, just kept his eyes on Lila the entire time, as if making sure she hadn't disappeared again. The pouch was placed carefully on the table between them, its contents still unknown. Once Rex was stabilized and resting on a thick blanket near the stove, Adam finally turned to the pouch. It was tied with a thin red string, smudged with dirt. Inside were several folded papers, creased and yellowing, but dry. The first was a handwritten ledger, a breakdown of town expenditures labeled Frost Hill Community Recovery Fund, 2020. But instead of emergency housing and food aid, the line items listed contractor bonuses, private land acquisition, and council incentives. At the bottom was a signature, M. Holloway, but it was wrong. The loops were too tight. The M curved unnaturally. Adam had seen Michael's real signature in fire reports. This one was a forgery. The second document confirmed it. A side-by-side comparison of two signatures, real and fake, dated within days of each other. And attached, a typed memo from a private accounting firm, flagged for unusual authorization procedures, but never submitted to the town council. Who would even have access to this? Adam muttered. Lila was holding a third page, lighter than the rest. A torn piece of notebook paper, with only a few lines written in faint pencil. I saw them change the ledger. I tried to speak up. They told me Rex would disappear like Michael. I'm sorry. I couldn't protect them both. There was no signature. But at the bottom, a faint paw print. Smudged. Burned into the corner of the page. Adam looked at the dog. Rex was watching them from across the room, still and silent. He turned back to Lila. Wherever he was, someone tried to shut him up. But he got out, she said. He came back. They didn't speak for a while. The storm outside picked up again, snow sweeping past the windows in fast, frantic bursts. "We can't just take this to the sheriff," Adam said finally. "They'll bury it again." Lila nodded. "We tell everyone. The town hall meeting. This Sunday." Her voice didn't tremble this time. "Let them all hear it at once. No more hiding." Adam smiled, but it wasn't the expression of victory. It was the expression of a man who just decided to take the most dangerous path and knew he'd never be able to go back. Later that night, Lila placed a folded towel under Rex's head and sat beside him. She whispered something into his ear, words Adam didn't catch. But he didn't need to. He saw the way the dog's tail thumped once, then rested again. Adam pulled out the old printer from the supply closet, the one he hadn't used since arriving in Frost Hill, and loaded it with ink. As he scanned the documents, printed duplicates, and copied the footage frame by frame from the warehouse camera, he felt the quiet resolve settle over him like the weight of a winter coat. The truth was no longer just something they knew. It was something they were going to carry, right into the heart of the town that had tried to forget it. The snow outside town hall fell in slow, deliberate flakes that morning, each one drifting like a moment stretched thin with anticipation. Frost Hill had not seen a crowd this large gather in years. Not since the last town fair, not since before the fire, before the silence. Now, the people stood wrapped in coats and scarves, shoulder to shoulder in front of the old courthouse doors, not because they wanted to, but because curiosity had finally outweighed their discomfort. Something was about to be said that could not be unsaid. The interior of the meeting hall was modest, wooden floors polished by decades of footsteps, pale green walls with framed black and white photos of long-gone mayors and community founders. The podium at the front creaked slightly with each gust of wind that slipped through the crack in the back window. A microphone stood waiting. Adam stood near the front with a stack of papers in one hand and a flash drive in the other. His jaw was tight, his eyes unreadable, his jacket still dusted with snow. Behind him sat Lila, her hair brushed, her coat patched and clean, her small hands resting on her lap. Rex lay beside her feet, a bandage still visible on his foreleg, head resting on his paws but eyes wide open. The townspeople filed in slowly, Meredith from the post office, Reverend Vane, even Nora from the clinic. Some faces were tight with suspicion. Others curious. A few held guilt like a tremor behind their eyes. In the back corner, Mrs. Elaine Murdoch sat stiffly, owner of the local grocery store. She was a woman in her late 60s, sharp-faced and sharply dressed even in snow boots, with thick gray hair pulled into a severe bun. Years ago, she had given Lila peppermint sticks at Christmas. Then she stopped. Near the aisle stood Mr. Glenn Peters, the retired high school principal. Tall, thin, balding, with a stooped back and round spectacles that magnified his squint. He had taught Michael Holloway decades ago. Then, years later, he had sent Lila home, for the safety of the other children. He hadn't seen her since. The room settled. No one spoke. No one coughed. Adam stepped forward. "My name is Dr. Adam Cole," he began, his voice steady, but quiet enough that everyone leaned in to hear. "You all know me as the vet out by Pinebrush Trail. Some of you have brought me your pets. Some of you have ignored me altogether. That's fine. I didn't come to Frost Hill to make friends." He paused, lifted the flash drive. "But I did come here for truth. And this," he inserted the drive into the projector's laptop, "is truth." The screen behind him flickered, then stabilized. A still frame appeared, the warehouse interior, smoke creeping along the ceiling beams. The footage rolled. Gasps rippled through the room as they saw Michael Holloway carry the little girl through the fire. The camera angle caught the panic in his face, the scorch marks on his coat, the determination in his eyes. There was no gasoline can, no lighter, no trace of the arsonist the town had painted for years. Adam stepped aside, letting the images speak. Then came the ledger documents, financial records signed with forged signatures, budget items misused. And finally, the note, written in pencil, and signed, but damning. When the last image faded from the screen, the room remained silent. Then Lila stood. She was small, far too small for the size of the room, for the gravity of what she was about to do. But she walked slowly, steadily, past Adam, past the microphone, and stood just in front of the podium, not behind it. She didn't want to hide behind wood or wires. She looked up at the room. At the faces that had once turned away. "My name is Lila Holloway," she said, her voice soft but clear, carrying to the farthest corners of the hall. "I'm 9 years old. I live near the forest, in the cabin my dad built." She glanced down, then back up again. "I've heard things about my father. That he was dangerous. That he was crazy. That he lit the fire." A rustle of coats. A cough in the back. Lila didn't waver. "I used to believe them," she said. "Because everyone did. Because no one told me anything else. Not even the truth." She looked over at Rex. "But then I found out that my dad didn't run from the fire. He ran into it. To save someone else's little girl." Now her voice rose slightly. "And he died doing that." She turned to face the room directly. "I'm not here to ask for anyone's pity. I don't want it. I don't need it. I just want my father, and my mother, to be remembered as who they really were. Good people. Brave people. Not names on a lie." Silence fell again. A full, unbearable silence. Then, from the back corner, a single clap. Slow. Hesitant. But real. It came from Glenn Peters, who had not stood during Michael's funeral. His old hands trembled as he clapped a second time. Then another followed, from the left side, where a teenage boy sat with his mother. And then it spread. The room rose slowly, people standing one by one. The applause didn't thunder. It bloomed, gentle, firm, and undeniable. Elaine Murdoch brought a gloved hand to her mouth, her shoulders shaking. Meredith Clark wiped her eyes with her sleeve. Even Reverend Vane lowered his head and whispered something under his breath, a prayer, or a regret, no one could say. Lila remained still, eyes wide. Then Rex stood up, walked beside her, and sat. The crowd clapped louder. Adam stepped forward, placed a hand gently on her shoulder. And in that moment, a child's truth broke through a town's silence. A month had passed since Lila's voice turned a silent town into one that began to listen. In that short time, the snow that had buried Frost Hill like a cold regret began to soften. Streets once empty now held footsteps again. Curtains once closed now cracked open to let sunlight in. But the biggest change was not in the air. It was in the way people spoke Lila's name, and her father's. The official ceremony took place on a pale blue morning in front of the rebuilt Frost Hill Town Hall. A fresh wooden sign hung above the door, newly varnished and golden lettered. It read, "Community, not convenience." Beneath it, a podium had been set for the formal statement of redress. Adam stood with Lila on one side and a quiet, thin boy about 5 years old on the other. His name was Noah, Lila's little brother, whom few in town had even known existed. His cheeks were still gaunt from the long winter of sickness, but his eyes were bright with the unmistakable shimmer of someone who had been allowed to dream again. He held tightly to Lila's coat. Rex stood proudly in front of them, fur grown back where it had once been matted and torn, a bright blue ribbon tied gently around his neck. A small crowd had gathered. Children from the school. Women from the bakery. Men who once whispered. Even Elaine Murdoch brought a basket of oranges. The new interim mayor, Henry Burke, stepped forward to read the town's official statement. He was a burly man in his 50s, with a sun-worn face, salt and pepper beard, and thick eyebrows that made him look constantly surprised. But he spoke gently, with a deliberate cadence that made each word feel like an unfastened weight being set down. We, the people of Frost Hill, formally and fully exonerate Michael and Clara Holloway of any wrongdoing in connection with the warehouse fire of 6 years ago. In light of new evidence, material and testimonial, it is clear they acted with bravery, not betrayal. He glanced at Lila, then continued. We also offer our public apology to their children, Lila and Noah Holloway, for the pain caused by years of silence and misunderstanding. This town failed you. Today is the beginning of making that right. As he stepped back, a soft wind brushed across the square. No one clapped. Not yet. Lila stepped forward instead. She wore a red woolen coat, slightly too big, sleeves rolled, and a knitted scarf someone had left outside the vet clinic for her, anonymously. She didn't speak this time. Instead, she reached down and took Noah's hand, then reached to touch Rex's head gently. Then, the crowd moved. One by one, people approached, not with words, but with gestures. A loaf of bread. A tin of jam. A toy train set for Noah. A new leash for Rex. Someone had even brought a small tree sapling, wrapped in burlap and twine. A girl from Lila's old school stepped forward shyly with a folded drawing of Rex wearing a superhero cape. Later that afternoon, the town gathered again, this time outside the old Holloway home. Where once there had been ash and splinters now stood a modest cabin with wide windows, a sloped roof, and a freshly painted front door the color of wild daisy yellow. Above it hung a carved sign, Hollow Haven. Inside, soft beds lined the walls, shelves of donated books, warm quilts stitched by hand. It was not a museum. It was a shelter. A safe place for children who had nowhere else to go. A place built from the story of a girl, a dog, and a father who never stopped running toward the fire. Among the volunteers was Sarah Talbot, a retired nurse with silver-streaked hair in a soft braid. She walked with a limp from a car accident years prior but was known for her quick humor and endless gentleness. She had once dismissed Lila as that fire girl, but now she was the first to unpack blankets for the children's beds. By evening, Rex lay in front of the newly built fireplace, legs stretched out, eyes half closed, but ears twitching as children's laughter bounced down the hallway. Lila sat on the porch steps with Noah beside her, both sipping hot cider. In front of them stood the small pine tree someone had gifted them. Its roots had already been set into the earth, and it swayed slightly in the breeze. Lila had insisted on planting it herself, digging through the cold soil with Adam's gloves and a spoon. Rex ambled over and sat beside her, tail brushing against her boots. She leaned toward him, her breath visible in the crisp dusk air. "We're not invisible anymore," she whispered, her fingers curling into the thick fur behind his ear. Rex didn't bark. He didn't move. He just leaned back, gently, against her side. That night, the stars over Frost Hill shimmered with quiet warmth. And in the house now known as Hollow Haven, no one was forgotten. No one was alone. No one was left out in the cold. Sometimes, the world turns its back on those who carry silent burdens. But just like Lila, sometimes all it takes is one moment of truth, one loyal friend, one stranger who chooses kindness, and the frost begins to melt. In the quiet corners of life, where no one is watching, God still plants miracles. Not always with thunder or light, but with a child's voice, a loyal dog, a letter in a firewood sack. If you've ever felt invisible, like no one would believe your story, let this be a reminder: God sees what others miss. He works through the small things, and He restores what was lost in ways we never expect. If this story touched your heart, we invite you to share it with someone who might need a little hope today. Comment Amen below if you believe that even in the coldest winters, God's love can bring light. And if you want more stories like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay with us. May God bless you and your family, today, and always.